Hey, today I wanted to discuss the biopsychosocial-spiritual model in medicine. This can be kind of an interesting and controversial topic for many people who are practicing medicine, but it's something that I think is critically important to the conversation and a really exciting expansion on a model that's widely respected today. There's a model called the biopsychosocial model that was introduced by George Engel in 1977 that has been largely adopted by medical institutions and medical education today. What's really exciting about this type of model, when you think about it applied to medicine and applying it to medicine, is that it helps you understand how suffering, disease, and illness is related to three different aspects of the human experience: the biological experience, the psychological experience, and the social experience. So what that means is that the person is actually considered more holy, and they actually contribute to their understanding and diagnosis of their disease and illness. So the biopsychosocial model really has been an exciting opportunity for clinicians to accept and consider a whole person when it comes to care. I would like to take things one step further, and many other researchers, scientists, and medical professionals have done so by adding the spiritual aspect to this conversation. So it's the biopsychosocial-spiritual model to medicine. And I think that the reason why this is so important is that it needs to be expanded to fully address a person's entire existence and how they relate to the world. So it's really the fullest wholeness of the human experience. And when we take a step back and consider, what is spirituality? What does spiritual mean? And especially in this context of medicine, which I'm introducing it into this conversation today. And spirituality and spiritual, the word spiritual, is a fluid, open discussion and conversation by today's standards. It's everything from non-religious and non-theistic practices such as positive thinking to really deeply religious experiences such as having an encounter with a divine entity. So spiritual and spirituality is really a broad span of a big conversation. And perhaps the most comprehensive definition I've come across, I found in the Journal of Palliative Medicine, actually. And it's the search for ultimate meaning, purpose, and significance in relation to oneself, family, others, community, nature, and the sacred, expressed through beliefs, values, traditions, and practices. That's a really big, powerful sentence, but I do think that it does encompass a really important aspect of the human experience that does need to be brought into the medical encounter. So when I sat down and started thinking about how could this be applied in medicine, I came across a really interesting opinion article written in the Journal of Medicines, which clearly laid out 5 different aspects to how spirituality can play out in medicine. And they are the spiritual religious coping, which I'll define for you in a second, spirituality of the physician, spiritual support for inpatients, spiritual complementary therapies, and spiritual anomalous phenomena. So if we take a step back and consider each of these aspects of the biopsychosocial spiritual experience in medicine, the first one is spiritual religious coping. And what I mean by that is, in the data and literature, even though spirituality and religiosity are 2 different entities, when you actually look at the data and how it impacts us at an individualistic level, it's actually quite similar. So even though you and I might have different thoughts or opinions about being religious or spiritual, the reality is that we end up having very similar experiences in the outcomes of our health and the experience and how we interact with our healthcare. So these folks at the Journal of Medicines combined the 2 terms, spiritual and religious, and created an SR coping model. And so what that essentially means is It's when something bad happens in life or in the hospital, and there's a lot of emotional distress in your life, and it's caused by that event, but you realize that it's outside of your control. So you turn to your religious or spiritual practices to help you through that really hard time. And the thing is those practices can either be helpful or harmful to your health and living experience at the time. So for example, positive things like meditation or prayer or being in congregation with others can be seen as helpful and decreasing stress throughout the experience. And there can be harmful coping mechanisms with relationship to spirituality or religiosity that can also harm your health and healing experience. So things like anger, guilt, shame. And there are practices that can continue to fuel those negative emotions that can negatively impact your health. This is one of the really interesting aspects of medicine that I like to personally explore with the people that I work with, is how these positive and negative spiritual experiences that you embark on in your life can positively or negatively impact your health and healing. The second thing I mentioned is spirituality of the physician. So we can't forget the fact that the person sitting in front of you who is delivering care has their own experience with spirituality and religiosity, and it might direct their clinical decisions in some kind of a way. Now, obviously, as medical professionals, we take oaths and we do everything we can to not allow our own personal opinions to affect the care that we offer. But it is still worth noting and acknowledging that there could potentially be some underlying bias based on that practitioner's relationship with religion and spirituality. And the other exciting aspect of this, with respect to the actual physician or clinician, is that it can also be used to address stress and burnout in the profession. So depending on how religious or spiritual a medical professional might be, actually could increase or decrease their interaction with their profession to make it better as a whole when we consider things like meditation and prayer. And so it's a really interesting conversation that can happen in a couple of different ways. And it's a really important aspect of humanizing medicine, remembering that clinicians and physicians are humans and also having a human experience. The third thing I mentioned is spiritual support for inpatients. The most obvious thing here is we all can imagine in the old days, there was a priest who would go around the wards to help folks who were staying in hospital long terms. But what does that mean for people today who enter the hospital? And what kind of services should they have access to? And what's the role of the physician in this experience? This is where it is very important for the physician to help facilitate whatever type of services the person in the hospital needs. So whether they need a clergyman to visit them, or they need a meditation or a prayer room to visit, they need to know what services and what locations are available to them. So there could be an orientation when they enter the hospital, if they're in some type of position to be able to go through with that. Or again, it's the job of the physician to make sure that the person knows all of the resources that can be made available to them from a spiritual and religious aspect. And the fourth thing, and maybe one of the most exciting things I really love talking about, is spiritual complementary therapies. This is the mystical, religious, or spiritual practices performed that provide a health benefit. So this can be everything from Reiki to healing touch, pranic healing, or even prayers from the church. I'm personally interested in biofield therapy and biofield science research. And so I spend a lot of time looking at different spiritual complementary therapies rather, that people could be considering to enhance their health and well-being. And I'll definitely go into that in other videos. And then the last thing is spiritual anomalous phenomena. So what does that mean? That's really the medically unexplained, the miracles, and how do we make sense of that in medicine? Without incorporating the biopsychosocial spiritual aspect into this medical model, we don't have any way to really explain how people have near-death experiences, or how they explain past life memories, for example, or again, any type of medical miracle remission that happens every day. And I think that we're finding, and we know that we're finding in the research, that there is more and more studies suggesting that the mind is a separate entity to the brain, and how that plays out in these experiences will continue to unfold throughout our lifetime, so that we learn how we are interplaying and maybe in control of or experiencing these truly mystical, magical, miraculous experiences in medicine. And as physicians, we get to see them all the time. And a lot of times we don't have the opportunity to sit and reflect on those experiences. And I think that it's important for us to acknowledge and realize that they have a place in this conversation. So what does all this mean, and why am I bringing this up? And I think it is just a conversation around how can we start to incorporate spirituality into conversations about medicine and medical care in a way that feels safe and evidence supported, and specifically really acknowledging of the people that we're serving. And if we continue to try to ignore and pretend like this aspect of the human experience isn't important, we're going to continue to miss out on a huge aspect of healing. So I believe that the true paradigm shift will occur only when the human spiritual dimension is fully understood and incorporated into healthcare. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to your comments. Let me know which one of these 5 aspects resonated with you. Like and subscribe my channel for all of these fun and exciting things as we continue to explore.